Well, my name is John Prutsman, and I graduated from Linfield in 1957. And I started playing football in 1953, and then my senior year was 1956, was the start of the streak. I majored in business, and I had a minor in economics and speech. I think they call that communications now.
That's right.
And when I was about 2 years old, when my parents moved out to Southwest Portland, right near where I live now, and we were going to a church, and there was a guy there, and his name was Jim Spazoff. And Jim was a Sunday school teacher of mine, and he went to Linfield. He also went to Lincoln High School in Portland and played football there, and I went to Lincoln High School and played football. And so it seemed kind of natural that, well, I'll come down and I'd love to play football, and where Jim Spazoff did. And so Jim and I, we were on the Alumni Council one time, and we were there together. Well, Jim was, of course, a lot older than I was. Jim was a classmate of Paul Durham's. And he was a little guy. He was probably about 5'5" or 5'6", something like that. And so Jim and I would see Jim at church, and he was always a natty dresser. And he showed up one time, and he had these tan pants, and he had a striped shirt, and then he had a knit blue tie, and I forgot how he was dressed. But I thought, well, he's a pretty natty dresser. And I got the same outfit, but I've never worn it like that. And we were going to have dinner at Charlie Walker's house, the Alumni Council. So Jim got to the point where he didn't drive, and so I'd go down to where he worked, and I'd pick him up and drive him down there. And I said, okay, now Spaz, now here's how I want you to dress. And he says, well, why? And I said, no, just dress. So anyway, he dressed, and I drive. So we had the identical dress on the thing, and we went to and we sat by each other at the dinner, and pretty soon, people looked over there and they said, "Well, you guys are dressed alike." We are. And I said, so then after that, I claimed we were twins. But anyway, that's how I ended up at Linfield, was because of Jim Spazoff, and actually he was also in the same fraternity before they went national and the thing. So that's how I ended up down here.
What were your first impressions of Linfield and of Mcminnville?
Well, I had come down to some ball games as a spectator, and so I had seen Ad Rushman play and some other things like that. The school was much smaller at that time. I don't recall exactly. It was probably less than 500 students here, so it was a lot smaller. And of course, since that time, it's expanded tremendously. The facilities are certainly a lot better than they were at that time, and but it was a friendly campus, and I had developed some good friendships down here that I still maintain with a lot of them. And then also I thought, well, that's a chance that I can maybe play some football.
Before we get into football, I'm curious if you had any favorite classes or professors that stand out in your memory.
Yeah, I was a business major, and so I ended up becoming very good friends with Dr. Harold Elkington. That was before he was a doctor, we called him. He was the advisor for our fraternity, the ATOs, and then he played the organ for the Baptist Church, and he was very active in the community, and just a really neat guy. And he and I kept in contact for years after that, and my wife and I came down and took he and his wife out to dinner maybe a couple of years before he passed away, but we kept that. He taught everything. He was now they have a business department, a great business department, and they must have, I don't know how many professors or teachers there, but at that time, he taught business law, he taught some sales, marketing, economics, all that kind of stuff. He's a neat guy, and so I spent a lot of time doing that.
You mentioned being in fraternity as well. Tell me about the kind of the fraternity experience for you as a student.
I'm sorry?
Your fraternity experience. You mentioned being
Yeah.
in the ATOs.
Yes, at that time while we had you can see from my smile, a story's coming up here. But past the president's house, there was a bridge that went over Cozine Creek, and the bridge. And then, excuse me, if you went up a little further, just around the bend, why the ATO house is up there, I think it was 310 it was Baker. That was before, they didn't say South Baker, but 310 Baker. And so a friend of mine that I had known from high school, a guy named Bill Ingram, he was an ATO. And then, of course, Jim Spazoff, he was a FIAP prior to ATOs and that type of thing. So it was kind of natural. And so when they had Pledge Week, while I think I put down 3 preferences, I had ATOs was number 1, second was ATOs, and third was ATOs. So I became an ATO for some reason. And the house was, it was just a residence house, but I had developed some good friendships over there, and it was great. Yeah.
So you mentioned football as one of
Yes.
the things you wanted to do here. So tell me about kind of first impressions of football, first year, first practices, first time meeting the guys.
Yeah, it was tough. It was really tough. The coach, and I think in one of those deals that I sent you about, maybe it was about the tradition that at that time, why Durham, you could not, they didn't give anybody water. You could not drink water during practice. And then also you had to be able to run a mile in less than 6 minutes in full gear on the thing. And that was tough. And they had drills called the meat grinder and all that kind of stuff. It was hot before the season started, and we lost a couple of guys from heat stroke. A guy named Marv Sherp, who was an excellent athlete. He was also a baseball player, but he dropped out of football just because it was, I can't imagine anybody not having their athletes with no water during practice, but it was tough. And the field was you had a big crown on it. And matter of fact, from my position at the end of the bench, you could hardly see across the top of the field. And shortly after that, they rebuilt that field. And they put in a new draining system, but it still didn't help much. And when they put in this turf field here, they took the crown off of that. And I think it was Carnahan said that it was like 32 inches or 34 inches was that crown. I mean, it was like climbing a mountain to get up to center field, and it was, but it was a tough deal. But Durham was a great guy, and we'd have to do wind sprints and all that kind of stuff, run up and down the stadium stairs and all that kind of stuff. And I was going to tell you the rest of the story about the bridge over Cozine. We had a guy in our fraternity, his name was Bob Rowland, and so Bob he'd come over and study at the library, and then he'd walk back to the fraternity house. Well, he walked past Harry Dillon's, President Dillon's house, and inside the garage there was Leslie's bicycle. So Bob gets his bicycle out, and he rides it over to the fraternity house. And then the next morning he gets up and he rides it back, puts it in the garage. Well, he had put more miles on Leslie's bike than Leslie was. And one morning, Bob overslept or something, and Leslie went out to get his bike, and of course the bike was stolen. So he reported to the police, and the police came, and of course he showed up on the porch of the fraternity house. So that ended up Bob's bike riding. But I thought that was pretty pretty funny.
A bad mark on your permanent record there to steal a bike from the president.
Right, but they had one thing. Durham always called everybody doctor or chief or coach or buddy or whatever it was. And I told her later on, I said, did it ever dawn on anybody you didn't know what your name was? But they had a guy, and one of the guys that was our first string end, his name was, they called him Dugan. And so Durham kept, okay, well, Dugan, Dugan that, or whatever it is. So they put out a list for the first game, the traveling game, and Dugan wasn't on there. And I couldn't figure that out. I said, well, how come Dugan isn't on there? He said, well, his name isn't Dugan, it's Bill Guerin. But Dermot had always called him Dugan for some reason, and so he was. And then, of course, Ad was on the team. And one of my stories I tell about Ad, a lot of that stuff is not true. Durham was loved to tell stories, and he was just had these weird stories, and they were just great. And one time, my wife and I had gone to New Zealand for a month or something like that, and we stopped in Hawaii on the way back, and had dinner with Kitty and Paul, and we were there for a couple of days. And Durham was telling about his first coaching job, and he said it was coaching at Yamhill, and he said the best back we had was 6 foot tall, and he weighed 53 pounds. And he was the only guy that was small enough, skinny enough to get through the holes that the linemen opened up. And then, of course, we'd all laugh at that. And then he said, they had one time, he said we hadn't won a game all season long, and finally we got down to the last game of the season, and he said I forgot who he said they were playing, and he said that the team they were getting beat, but for some reason they got a couple of breaks, and they ended up in the fourth quarter, and they were ahead. And because one of the guys had fallen on a fumble and whatever it was. So they had about a minute and a half left in the game, and so Durham calls a timeout, and he got the quarterback over there, and he said, now here's what I want you to do. First play, I want you to run around the right end. Then second play, I want you to run around the left end. Then third play, I want you to run right up the middle, and then I want you to punt. So they run around the right end, and they don't do very well. They get stopped at the line of scrimmage. They run around the left end, and they got thrown for about a yard loss. And they run up the center on the thing, and the guy jumped over a lineman, and then he went down, and the guy that was going to tackle him, a linebacker, fell down, and he got past him. And then he got past the halfback, too. And he ran down, and he got to the 12-yard line. And so Durham thinks, boy, now we got it whipped, because now, we're going to win this game. And he looks out there on the field, and they're in punt formation. And he can't believe it. And so he called a timeout, and he got the quarterback over there, and he said, what were you thinking to be down there on the 12-yard line and to line up in punt formation? And the kid says, well, I was thinking we got a pretty stupid coach. So anyway, well, we all laughed at that thing. And then Durham explained, he said, well, actually my first teaching job was at Yamhill, but Yamhill did not have a coach or did not have a football team. And so Kitty, his wife, she got on his case. Well, why are you lying about a thing like that, Paul? And of course, all these stories were all just fabrications. Anyway, it was kind of like these Uni Gagan stories that I'm sure you've heard about, where he was the sports editor at Mcminnville, the News Register. And then any time where there would be a picture, they'd send him 100 pictures. And if there was one where a guy's face was blocked out by a basketball or something like that, then Durham would claim that was Uni Gagan. And then Uni had all this dialogue about Uni Gagan and what a great athlete he was and all that kind of stuff. So he had just lots of stories like that. And then after he went to Hawaii, I send him jokes. And he loved those, and he would go down and he'd be either on the rubber chicken circuit or he would be down there at the quarterback club or something like that, and he'd be sharing the jokes with the people. Great guy.
Describe yourself as a player.
I was not a good athlete. I had very little experience, and I think I started out as an end. And then I found out you were supposed to catch a ball, and so that kind of screwed things up for me a little bit. I did catch one pass in a scrimmage, and but I caught the pass and I dropped down on my knees, and Durham explained to me, "Well, no, you're not supposed to get on your knees. You're supposed to get up and run with the thing, you know." So that was my one catch of my career. So then they had me listed in some of the programs as a guard, but actually I played tackle most of the time. And played primarily on the JVs. And it was interesting, at that time it was a single platoon, and so we played both ways. And there would be guys that played like the full game at a position. The most I played for 58 and a half minutes. And they took me out of the game, and I said, "Why are you playing? Why did you take me out of the game?" And he said, "It looked like you were tired." Oh, really? You know? But the guys were, we talked about the programs earlier. The guys were not big. I mean, we had, I think, 7 guys over 200 pounds out of a team of 88. But I met some really good guys, and I learned a lot about football, and learned a lot about life, about getting along with people, team building, that kind of stuff. And that's what they have continued to do all this time, whether it's been Durham or clear up to Joe Smith now. That's one thing that you talk about. I had always talked about. This is the place. I got the best classroom in the world out there on the football team, because it takes cooperation, it takes energy, it takes all these kind of things that you need in life if you're going to get through there.
Tell me about some of the teammates that stand out in your memory.
Teammates? Mm-hmm. Well, of course, Ad and I have maintained our friendship over the years. But we had Dick Holliday, who you're going to be interviewing. He and I were classmates, and we were fraternity brothers. And he was in my wedding, and I was in his wedding, and so we maintained our friendship over the time. Dick doesn't get up to the games very often. Last time he came up, we have season tickets, and have had for years. And so my wife, Evelyn, she wasn't going to be able to use her ticket, so I called up Dick, and I said, "Hey, Dick, you want to come up? And Evelyn's not going to the game. Do you want to come up and use her seat?" And he says, "Yeah, that'd be great. As a matter of fact, Mary, my wife, she's going to be in a conference, and she's going to be staying out by the airport." I said, "Okay, well, I'll come out to the motel, I'll pick you up, and we'll go to the game." So we go down and drive down there. We're catching up on old times and that. And so we walk in, and there's a gal there, and she's selling programs. $2 for a program. And Dick said, "Well, you're buying the tickets for the game. I'll buy the programs." I said, "Well, that's fine." Now, Dick was a math major. And Dick, if you lined everybody up by how smart you thought they were, Holiday would be clear out of sight. You'd think, here's a guy that can't, but he's a brilliant guy. And he ended up being the chairman of the math department down at Road Community College. So Dick comes up, and so he goes over to the program area there, and he said, "I'd like 2 programs, please." And so the gal hands him 2 programs, and Dick pulls out his wallet, and he pulls out a $50 bill, and he hands it to the gal. She looked at that thing, she pulled out a calculator to figure out how much change to give him. And I said to Dick, math major.
So I want to talk about the 56 season specifically
Yes.
now. So let's talk about that season. That's your junior year.
Sure.
So what changed about that season? What did it mean for you guys to get to that point of winning a league championship?
Well, it was an interesting year. We had, I forgot, we had several ties at that time where you could have a tie. And I forgot, probably says on the program someplace, but we had a couple of ties that season. We had, let me go back to the earlier season. I can't remember exactly which one it was. It might have been the one where Ad Rutschman was a senior. But we were, there was a sports reporter for the Oregonian or the Journal or something like that, and he'd picked us wrong on every single game that season. The ones that he picked us to lose, why we won, and the ones that he picked us to win, why we lost on the thing. But we had a pretty good team. Ron Parrish was our quarterback, and then we had some great running backs. Yogi Umbarger was one of the running backs. Bob Flood was a halfback. The football was a lot different game today. Even guys that were friends of mine. My daughter graduated in '83, and some of her classmates. And one of them was a guy named Tom Vinson, who was an All-American offensive guard. And I would call up Tom and I'd say, I don't understand this. What they're talking about, a cover 2 or cover 3 or whatever it is. And he said, I don't know. But they have monster backs, and they have rovers, and they got split ends, and they got wide receivers and all that kind of stuff. And we played what they called a belly series. And basically the quarterback takes the ball, and then he turns around and he runs down the line of scrimmage, and then he can hand off to a halfback. He can pitch out to another guy. It's kind of an option, And so we ran that. Our JV team, for scrimmages, we ran the offense of everybody else's offense. So we not only knew all of our plays, but we knew all the plays of other people as well. So so that was a lot of fun. And Marty Bergen, he played. Marty was an excellent quarterback, but he was not a tall guy. All the Bergen guys, there were 3 of them that played baseball at the same time. Marty he'd come back from Korea. He was a fighter pilot in Korea, and so he came back. And then the next boy was John, who was in my class. And then the youngest brother was Dan, and they were playing baseball, and Coach Helzer put all of them in the game at one time. And I don't know whether it ever happened or not, but I thought it would be really, really great if it did happen. And Vern Marshall was first baseman, and to be able to call a triple play, that's Bergen to Bergen to Bergen to Marshall, But I don't think it ever happened, but they did get to play in the same game, yeah. And Marty was a good ball player. He was only about 5'5" or something like that. Of course, now you got to be probably over 6 foot to see across the lineman. But anyway, we had some good ball players and some tough guys. And Vern Marshall was very tough. Vern is the one that has the named after the Marshall Award for the guy that is most inspirational and leadership. Went on to become an NFL referee.
So you follow up. You have the '56 season where you win the first conference title in 20 years, and you follow it up with another really good season in '57, your senior season. So tell me about how Linfield football had changed. Had the culture changed at all?
No, not really. From the time I was a freshman to the time that I was a senior, it hadn't changed that much. One of the big changes was when Howard Morris and Vic Fox came onto the program. They were both guards, and they were both All-American guards, and had both of them had their jerseys retired. And so an interesting, I think it's interesting, story. Howard had been a all-state football player in the Shrine game. And one of his, he played at Central, which is down at just out of Medford, and Crater High was at Central, and so he one of his buddies that was on his team, high school team, he went on to become to play for SOC, Southern Oregon College, and so we were playing Southern Oregon. And so Howard was the kind of, Dennis Anderson always said, well, Howard is the guy, he'd knock you on your butt and then pick you up. And he was just that kind of a guy, a real inspirational guy. Nobody ever outworked him, nobody ever out-hustled him. He was inspiration, just a phenomenal person. Anyway, why Howard went out and he blocked this guy, his teammate, that then went on to play at SOC. And so he blocked this guy, knocked him right on his keister, and then so the guy jumped up and he went over and he hit Howard on the back with his fist. He said, good block, buddy," or something like that. And one of the referees, Al Leitner, saw him and gave him 15 yards for unnecessary roughness. And I said to Howard, I said, what were you thinking when that happened? Did you say anything? He said, "No, I tried to remember that Durham said never argue with an official's call." So anyway, but I thought that was pretty funny for the guy to get 15 yards for congratulating Howard on the good block.
From those seasons that stand out to you, the 56 or 57 season, are there certain opponents that you remember or certain games that stand out?
Yeah, in that era, College of Idaho was the powerhouse, and they had an end whose name was R.C. Owens, and R.C. Owens went on to play for the San Francisco 49ers, and I can remember seeing some of the 49er games on TV. And Owens would go down into the end zone, and then he would jump way up. He had springs for legs, and he'd jump up, and they'd throw a real high ball to him, and he'd catch the thing and come down, and they called it the alley-oop. And these broadcasters were saying, "I've never seen anything like that in my life," you know. He said, "Well, we saw 4 years of it, you know." And then in basketball, he also played in basketball, and one of the years, or 1 or 2 of the years, Elgin Baylor also played basketball, and I remember seeing a game at the old gym, and Elgin Baylor was bringing the ball down the court, and in the old gym, they had 2 doors at both ends of the gymnasium, and the door on the northwest went into the room where they washed the towels, and then the one on the northeast, it went out to the crowd, outside. Well, he was bringing the ball down, kind of down the center of the court, and all of a sudden, Elgin Baylor puts on just a burst of speed, headed right for that door like he's going out. And I thought, what's going on there? And he threw the ball up over his head like that, and I followed the track of the ball, and R.C. Owens was hanging up there about that far over the rim, and took the thing and smacked, and stuffed it. It was just, I'll never forget that play. Nobody had ever seen anybody do that before, and it was Elgin Baylor and R.C. Owens. But they had a good team. We had Durham on our senior year. He said they had scouted some of the games, and they had their quarterback's name was McKinney, and so the slogan for that week practice was "McKinney gets shaky when hit." Well, McKinney got shaky when hit, but he still made about 20 out of 25 passes. So I don't think we did. I think that was one of our losses that year. So.
Tell me a little bit about yourself after Linfield. What did you do after graduation?
Oh, okay. Well, when I got out of the war was going on, the Korean War was going on, and I joined the Navy Reserve when I was in high school, and so I had at that time I had 2 years on to do in reserve and 2 years on active duty. Well, then when in my freshman year, then they quit fighting in Korea. And then so guys started coming back, and including Marty Bergen and those guys. And so, but I still had to fulfill my military requirement. So I would drive in the winter times. Lots of times I would go up to if I was needed to go up to the naval base in Portland. I would drive up there, and then I'd come back on the to Linfield. And they had a electronics division in Mcminnville, and so then sometimes if I was up in Portland, then I'd have to come down there. So I went back and forth like that. So I tried to get a job after I graduated, and I couldn't do that because although there was rules against holding somebody hostage because they hadn't fulfilled their military requirement, I had interviewed with Crown Zellerback. And then about in May or June of that year, Eisenhower signed a bill that said, okay, for all these guys that have been for 2 and 2 are automatically signed over 2 and 8, and you can finish out your military service like that. So I called up Crown Zellerback, and next day they hired me. So I worked for Crown Zellerback for about 3 years, and went to paper school to learn the paper business, and then a company in Portland called Van Waters and Rogers. They had a paper department. So I left Crown, and then I went to work for this Van Waters and Rogers. Their largest department within Van Waters and Rogers was industrial chemicals. So I figured out pretty quickly that that's where all the action was. So I started working in industrial chemicals, and I went out and sold for them, and then I was a sales manager for them, and I worked for them for 35 years. And then they reorganized the company, and I lost my job there, and so I sold industrial chemicals for another company for 15 years. So I sold industrial chemicals for 50 years.
Amazing.
Retired when I was, I think, 75.
So what did as you got out of Linfield, what did it mean to you to have a Linfield education? How did that help get you going into the real world?
Well, it was interesting. I think one of the things that I learned at Linfield, the fact that it's a liberal arts school, I found that most of the time the people that I associated with that had come from Oregon or Oregon State or Washington State or whatever it was, they had a background in some academic field, but they didn't make a living at that. They changed to fields. So I felt that was always a benefit to me of having a liberal arts education. So I thought that was very important. The other thing is the fact that because Linfield was a smaller school, I got to participate in a lot of activities. I played in the band for a while, and my wife and I both sang in the choir, and so we got to do a lot of things like that. So that was important for me too.
What about following the football team as an alumni? I'm curious about supporting the team after graduation and sort of following the program along. How was that for you, and what was it like watching the team grow into what it's become today?
Well, it was great. We did not get to go to many games when our children were young. But then later, after they grew up and left the nest, then we got more involved in the thing. And so we had season tickets for a long time. And then we also, some years, we went to every game, both home and away. And we would drive up to, for instance, if they played Simon Fraser, we'd drive up to the game in British Columbia and this type of thing. Got to tell you about Harry Dillon. Harry was noted for a couple of things. One of them was when Linfield finally beat Willamette. We were just a doormat to Willamette, and when they finally beat Willamette, why Harry went out and stood on his head on the 50-yard line, and then when they did it later on the thing, he did that again. Well, Harry would be up there in the stands. And I would go up and I'd talk to him. I said, well, Dr. Dillon, how are you doing? And he said, oh, I just, my eyes are bad and I'm just not in very good health and all this kind of stuff. And I'd be sitting there at a game, and they would have some games where the wind was just blowing, just raining and all this kind of stuff. And people were just, deserting the stadium. But Harry would always sit up there. And I thought, well, what is an inspiration for that guy to be up there? And he had to be 90-some years old or something like that. And here's Harry up there, toughing it out to the last of the game.
That's excellent.
But we would, so lots of times, there were several years that we would travel to all the games. And so my wife, we were going to have a family dinner. And the last game, it seemed like quite often it was the last game of the season. We would be up at Whitworth, and it was cold and snowing and all this kind of stuff. And it was a long way up there. And so I said to Evelyn, I said, I'd really like to see that game up there, but we've got that family dinner on Sunday. She said, well, I could handle that. So we got up. Must have been 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. Jumped in the car, drove up. Watched the game, jumped back in the car, got home at 2 o'clock in the morning or something like that, to go to the game, and we'd go to OIT and SOC and all these other places. So we did that for years and years. Can't do that anymore, but we don't. We go to all the home games. Haven't missed one of those for a long time. Watch the others on the screen, and do that.
What's your impression of Linfield football today, and how it differs from when you were playing?
Oh, it differs a lot. First of all, the players are a lot bigger, and I think they're tougher too. Durham did not want us to lift weights because he didn't want us to be muscle bound. But you go over there, and one of the things that's really neat about what they've done down here is they've got the facility now so that they can train these guys. The trainers, they have both the personnel and the equipment to do that. The game is entirely different than it was at that time. And, I can't help but think that when we were playing both ways, I don't know that where you could play with that intensity anymore for two games. We did have a player, can't think of what his name was, but he was on Hall of Fame, Linfield Hall of Fame. Maybe it was last year. Yeah, last year or the year before. I should know that. I'm on the committee, but anyway, he was all conference in offense, defense, and special teams. First string all conference in three areas.
Never came off the field. Never.
Well, he of course, special teams, why he would, go on but no, he was not in for every play, but he was still, enough to be all conference on. He was that good a ball player.
So tell me about the streak, and we were talking off camera a bit about when you sort of became aware of the idea of the streak. So tell me about as you guys became aware of that and how and what it meant to you at the time.
Yeah. I was really not aware of that for a long time. I saw there were a couple of games that came really close. Of course, we live in Portland, and so we'd always go to the Lewis and Clark game. And that was kind of sad, too, because Lewis and Clark, when I was playing ball, they had some excellent teams and some good running backs and just real good ball players. So they were always a threat, along with Willamette. And one of the last games, let's see, I can't remember who the quarterback was. He was the kid that went down, and then he was the general manager at New Orleans or someplace. I can. The quality of my memory is excellent, but the duration pretty much sucks.
Talking about Randy Mueller.
Randy Mueller?
Randy Mueller.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's now.
Yeah, and so anyway, he was playing up there, and we were behind, I think, with 16 seconds left in the game, something like that, and we pulled that thing out to give us a winning season. If we had lost it, why, that would have ended the streak. But the thing is, I have said, and I think I mentioned to Matthew, people have asked me, they said, well, are you proud to be one of the guys on that team that started the streak? And I said, yes, I'm very proud of that. But I'll tell you one thing. We wouldn't be celebrating today if the streak only lasted 1 year. So there's a lot of guys that have kept this thing going. Now, you know, they changed the name of the street out there in front of the stadium to the Street. That's not easy to say. They changed the name of it, you know. Maybe they'll make it a permanent deal. I don't know. I'll tell you one team that I would not want to be on, and you guys know what team that is already. Would not want to be on the team that didn't keep the streak going.
You were talking earlier about the person who kind of coined the idea of the streak for you.
Yeah, and that was Dennis Anderson. Dennis is a good guy. And he would come over here and he would work on his vacations. He would work, basically do promotional stuff for the football team and that. And so he did a great job. So he was, apparently, people were aware that there was winning consecutive seasons on the thing, but nobody ever called it the streak on the thing. And I don't know when we started calling it the streak, but it was because of Dennis Anderson. Dennis can probably tell you what that thing, and I hope you get a chance to interview Dennis. Neat guy. But anyway, the streak is Dennis's creation. So we track that thing now.
You talked about all the other people who played a role in the streak over the years,
Yeah.
of course, and many thousands of people. I'm curious, what if someone weren't familiar with the streak and you were trying to tell them about it? What would you want someone to take away from the idea of 64 plus consecutive winning seasons? What's the takeaway from that?
Well, I'd say that it doesn't happen by accident. And the streak probably goes back prior to 1956, when a guy named Henry Lever was the coach for Paul Durham and those guys. So I had met Henry Lever one time, but I can't say that I knew him well. But there was something about that man then that continued on as an inspiration to Paul Durham and Roy Helzer both played for him. And then when I was here, there was also a track coach named Hal Smith. And then and Durham was a football coach. When Durham first came down here, he was a football coach and the basketball coach. And he had known Roy Helzer since they were pups. And so he told Roy that he wanted him to be the basketball coach. Roy was a professional baseball player. And so he said, well, I don't know anything about coaching basketball. So Durham and Helzer, they co-coached basketball for a while. But then there were these guys that were Durham at football, Roy Helzer at basketball and baseball, then Ted Wilson in basketball, Hal Smith. These people were men of great integrity, great principle, great work ethic. And so that carried on. And then, of course, Ad Rutschman, then he came back as the coach. And so then, that basically just continued on through these guys. And so it's amazing to where they get a guy like Joe Smith on this thing. Well, Joe Smith is a wonderful coach, but Joe Smith on his shoulders, he brings the experience clear back from where this thing started. So Linfield is no longer the doormat. They're the pinnacle. They are the goal that everybody shoots for. Notre Dame plays football very nicely. They play a lot of different teams. The teams that they play can have a losing season, but they got a successful season if they beat Notre Dame. That's exactly what's happening at Linfield now. And these guys will like nothing better than to beat Linfield. And I'm proud to be a part of it. I'm proud to be a Wildcat.
Love it. So you mentioned that you're also on the Hall of Fame committee
Yes.
You've obviously stayed very involved, Alumni Leadership Council. Tell me about
Yes.
your kind of service to Linfield as an alumni.
Well, I try and do what I can for the school, and I've been on Alumni Council for 2 or 3 times. I guess I'm going to have to keep doing it till I get it right. I've been Alumni Council president. Just whatever I can do. If somebody says we want you to do that, if it's within my capabilities, well, I do it and continue to do it. Durham, when he'd send a note back, I'd send him a letter, and he'd always sign the note, "Love, Linfield." Now, Durham was not treated real well in his final years. What had happened, and I don't know all the details of it, but apparently what had happened is that there was somebody that was not eligible for a scholarship or something like that. And they had reported that they had given him a scholarship. Well, they didn't actually give him a scholarship. They went back and then corrected that on the thing. No, they did not get a scholarship. And don't hold me to this. I could be completely mistaken on that thing. But basically then Durham got blamed for that error on the thing. And so that's kind of, he decided to leave after that. So, but he, for years and years, he would come back in the summertime, and then we would have these get-togethers with him. And I think I showed you a copy of a paper that talked about that. He always wanted to know, like, what's going on with your families? Have you seen this person? Have you seen that person? Tell me about what you're doing, doctor, or, whatever. How you running, buddy? And he always was very interested. It was not a superficial thing. You weren't just a number on a jersey. You were a person that was that he accepted into his life, and we accepted him into our lives as well. And it was the same way with our teammates. And I think I see that, still see that in the teams today. These guys show up to practice, for the game. They're sharp looking. They're dressed like they're in all business on the thing. And there's no joking around. I'm sure they're having a good time, but they got a mission. And I think that the mission is the streak. Yeah.
What are your hopes for the future, both for the school and for the football team?
It's interesting. I was asked when I was president of the Alumni Association. I was asked to speak for at the trustees meeting one time. My dreams for Linfield, and so I talked about. In my speech, I talked about dreams on the thing. And in the Bible, they talk about Joseph had a dream, and this guy had a dream, and all these people that were dreamers. And I said, well, Dr. Martin Luther King, he said he had a dream. And of course, they killed him, And Joseph in the Bible, he had a dream they're going to kill him too, So there's a danger in being dreamers. But I went through the kind of a list of dreams that I would like to have for Linfield. And at the time where they had a very small endowment, probably $1 million if that. They were pretty much living hand to hand. And I said, I would like to see Linfield, I dream of the time that Linfield can have a big endowment where they can afford to do some of these kind of things. I dream of a football team that can continue on and win games. I dream of athletic facilities. I dream of, at that time, I think that Pacific University had invited a Rhodes Scholar or a Nobel Prize laureate or something like that. I dream of the fact of when Linfield can have that. And so I went on, I think I might even have that speech someplace, but I went on, and one time I reviewed it a little bit later, and about half of those things or more had become not dreams, they had become actualities on the thing. So I think it's important for all of us that are involved in Linfield to continue on to dream for not just that doesn't stop at the end of the streak. It doesn't stop at the end of this. It doesn't stop at this. This is the beginning of the rest. Today is the beginning of the rest of my life. I intend to live forever, and so far it's working. Matter of fact, I set a new personal record this morning. I beat the old, for the most consecutive days I've been alive, beat the old record by 1 day.
Another streak.
And I'm going for another record tomorrow.
So one of the things that Kevin likes to ask, that I'm going to ask because I know it came up in some of the things
Sure.
you wrote. Tell me about the equipment, the football equipment you played in.
God, most of the helmets were they're plastic, and they had a web that went around your head like this, and then it had the rivets on the outside. And if you hit a guy, when I was in high school, I hit a guy with my head, and it busted the rivets out of the helmet on the thing. So I came out of the game, and they gave me another helmet, and I went in, and the same thing happened. And the coach said, "Get him out of there. We're running out of equipment." So, but these helmets were terrible, and so once in a while, somebody would have a different helmet. I think Howard Morris had a leather helmet for a while, and this was before they had no face masks on the thing. Face masks really became a thing, came accepted, I think, when the Los Angeles Rams they had a kind of a plastic bar that went around in front. And so that, I think, kind of broke the idea of, well, you got to be tough and get your nose broken and your teeth knocked out before you're an official football player. So I would put on, once in a while, if I get my nose broken or something like that, well, I would wear a face mask. But most of the guys did not. Most of the guys wore high top shoes. Certainly, the helmets probably are the main thing that makes the difference. And then, of course, I think the training, the fact that these guys are in great shape and they're big and fast and tough. I think it helps when you don't have to play both ways too. You know, I don't know how they can do that. You know, how we could do it. You know, because you're just always going.
Did you wear mouth guards?
I'm sorry?
Mouth guards? Did you wear mouth guard when you played?
No, they did not wear teeth guards. No.
Nothing to protect your face at all. Your face was just out there to be
Right. Other than I broke my nose and I put a guard on. They had when I was playing high school football at Lincoln. Why we were playing Cleveland, and I went to tackle this guy, and he got me right on the nose with his knee, and busted my nose. Well, that was Yogi Umbarger, and Yogi. Then he came down to Linfield. I always claimed that Yogi played football for 7 different colleges, and he graduated from Linfield and still had 3 years eligibility left. But he played at Colorado. He played for the Oregon Rooks. He played for Grays Harbor. And I don't know. He played spring ball at one place, and then something. He, you know, I exaggerated just a little bit there. Oh, really? But anyway, we're playing. We're scrimmaging, and so I was on defense, and and Yogi was he was on offense. And so they had some new plays, and so they ran this play, and I went through it untouched and sacked the quarterback on the thing. And so I guess I figured if I could do that, why, you know, there's something the matter. So they tried it again, and I did the same thing. And so now I should have been a little smarter than that, figuring, well, they're probably going to do something that I'm not waiting for. So anyway, I went through and I grabbed the ball carrier or whoever the player was, and I had my hands on him. And Umbarger comes through as a blocking back and hit my elbow and broke my elbow. That's why I don't have my picture on the team picture. But I told Yogi, I said, you know, it's not bad enough you break my nose in high school, you break my elbow, and you know, when we're on the same team. Another thing, I'll tell you, when we had a reunion, why, if you read the reunion book, why most of the guys, the thing that they remember was an incident that happened to me. They had Durham. We had a sound-powered phone. And this phone line went up to Roy Helzer was up on the press box on top of the stadium, and this cord was about the size of that orange cord down there. And so Durham would walk up and down the field, and I was sitting on my favorite position at the end of the bench there. And then when Durham would come by and he'd take the phone, and then he'd go down, and then when he'd come back, why then this is a pretty important deal. I would pull this cord back up there, and I had this big mass of cord out there, and it looked like kind of like a spaghetti salad out there. And so Durham comes by, and he said to me, okay, Prutsman, go in at right tackle. And so I took off for the field, and I didn't, because I didn't want to say, you mean me? So anyway, I take off for the field, and I caught my foot in that on that coil of cord there. And I could feel the thing cinch up around my leg, but I know I wasn't turning back, and so anyway, I ran along and hopped on one leg until I could get the phone off, and then threw it back on the thing. And Ron Parrish, he thought that was the funniest thing he'd ever seen in his life. And of course, I knew that everybody in the stands going like, let's see what this duke is going to do. So I had a guy, I think I weighed about 195 pounds or something like that, and I had a guy across me that weighed about 240, and I didn't have a choice but to block him. And Parrish called about the next 5 plays through my hole, So anyway, well, that was kind of my claim to fame, and that was one of the things in my speech that I talked about was my claim to fame. I had to start telling it myself. People claimed that I stepped in the water bucket. Well, we didn't have a water bucket, but they said I still stepped in it. But it was the phone cord.
Do you recall what the team goal was and sort of what the objectives or what the team goal was for the season in 1956?
I didn't.
The team objective entering the 1956.
I don't know that we set any objectives. I mean, it's to win the games, but we didn't have a. I think that probably the fact that Linfield had only won one conference championship, this was a whole new experience for us. I mean, this is not keeping the streak alive, and we didn't say, well, okay, now let's see if we can start a streak that's going to last for 65 years. So it was like every game was a game that we want to win, and we tried our best and won a few of them. Yeah.
All right. Well, John, thank you so much.
Yeah, you bet.
For joining us today, for all the great stories. Really appreciate your time today, and we'll go ahead and let you off the hook here.